Welcome to another episode of the Manufacturing Executive Podcast. I'm Joe Sullivan, your host and a co-founder of the industrial marketing agency Gorilla 76. So let me kick things off today by asking you this. Does technology have to be all or nothing? Do we have to either be on the Industry 4.0 bandwagon or off of it? And is it possible that in this increasingly data-driven manufacturing environment, we're losing sight of the value provided by human input? Today's guest has drawn on his career experiences to build a solution that tackles this issue head-on. Martin Cloake is the CEO and co-founder of Raven.ai. Raven.ai's platform delivers increased profits and 10x plus ROI to top global manufacturers by guiding actions with real-time insights. Martin is an experienced executive, an award-winning technology and entrepreneur with a background in manufacturing, data science, IP, and operations management. Martin holds multiple patents and is a mechanical engineering and business graduate from McGill University in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Martin, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Martin, you've got a great story about how your software, Raven.ai, came to be, and in particular, how your experience in sales earlier in your career at Blinds2Go influenced your decision to build this company. So I was hoping you could kind of start out by explaining what Raven.ai is in the first place for listeners, and also to tell us a little bit about the journey that influenced your decision to create it.
Absolutely. So, at a high level, we help manufacturers produce more efficiently. And I can get into some of the details here. But, fundamentally, if manufacturers can understand what's happening, what has happened, it's much easier to take actions to improve performance in the future. So, we help manufacturers make sure they know exactly what's happening at their plants. And then we also help them take action. So, at the core, it's not that complicated, but it was very much influenced by my early experiences working both in tech and in manufacturing.
No, that's great. I want to quote something you said in an article that you published late last year on LinkedIn. So you said, getting excited about manufacturers being data rich is like going on and on about how much paint Pablo Picasso had in his studio. Our obsession with data is making us forget who and what actually provides value. I think this was a really interesting and powerful statement. I'm just wondering if you could unpack that for us a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe what I can do is I can kind of frame it within my experience that caused me to found Raven. You alluded to the fact that I started off my career at Blinds2Go.
Yeah.
So, my background is in high tech. I am at the core a high tech, engineer and entrepreneur. And I graduated from McGill University in the early 2000s. And tech and telecom had actually, there wasn't as much activity in telecom, and I was recruited by Blinds2Go, which is kind of not what I had expected to go into, but it was a pretty neat offering. Blinds2Go, I'm not sure what part of the country are you in?
I'm in St. Louis, Missouri. So
okay, so I'm not sure if Blinds2Go was actually all the way out to St. Louis, but it's an East Coast manufacturer with 100 plants, and really innovative way to look at manufacturing kind of holistically. And one of the first things that I did when I went to work at Blinds2Go is they got me to sell blinds in a blind store, which was a really, somewhat shocking, but kind of ingenious way to connect people to the reality of what it is to work in manufacturing. So here I am, graduate from McGill University, full of confidence, which, I think that's what they give you when you go to McGill, thinking that I know how the world works, being sent to a blind store in Totowa, New Jersey. And the idea is you work in a blind store until you get good at it. And once you get good at it, then you get to come back and work in the plants. So I just remember, calling my wife within the first couple of days there and saying, like, what's going on here? I'm an engineer and I'm selling blinds at a retail blind store. And so anyway, as it started to go, and I started to realize, a couple of interesting things. First off, from a sales perspective, if somebody walks into a blind store, they're there to buy blinds, right? So you should be able to then, work with them and get them to, buy a blind, which I realized pretty quickly. But the second thing was to really understand, what is the impact on your customers if there's a quality problem? It's at some point in manufacturing, we see quality problems as a number, but I remember those cases where I mismeasured a blind and it came back to the customer and they say, you screwed it up. And really as on the retail side to live that firsthand experience of what, the user experience of manufacturing, it changes how you perceive those numbers. If something's late and your customer is asking for this. So that was really an interesting experience to sort of show me what the consumer side of manufacturing was. And I had never worked in retail sales. I'd worked tutoring math. So then after that, I went to work in the plants, and I did all sorts of roles in the plants, from quality engineer to product engineer. And one of the first roles I had was as a production supervisor of a couple lines. And again, full of that McGill confidence, I thought I knew what manufacturing was. I'm going to get my Excel file and I'm going to optimize the process, and it's going to be. I had this one particular Excel file that I really liked. It was an awesome file. I think it was about 6 or 7 megs, which at the time opened quite slowly, but it had all these neat, it was a pretty neat file. And I was also playing with data from Cognos, which is interesting because, one of my main advisors was one of the key people at Cognos before acquisition here. So anyways, I had all this data and I was seeing all these things. And at some point I went to my plant manager and I said, hey, can you look at my Excel file? I think I'd like to show you. And he says, Martin, he says, yes. Do you know the names of all 200 operators at the plant? And I said, no. And he said, well, I want you to memorize the names of all 200 people in your plant. And then once you've done that, you can come back and I'll look at your file. And I'm like, what? Okay. So anyways, I was still at the stage where, I begrudgingly listened to him. And then I started, spending more time on the shop floor, and then realized that just by walking around, it was clear where the problems were. Somebody would ask me for to help with a certain machine, or they would ask for help or something. And I just see stuff as a natural problem solver. And then what I realized is that the way to drive improvement in my lines wasn't with my Excel file, was by walking around, asking questions, looking at the process. And so my day morphed from a day that was more focused on analysis in Excel, where I was basically walking laps around the plant. So my morning would start, I'd get there at 10 to 7, and I'd meet with some of my team leads. And then I'd go and say good morning to all my operators. And they say, oh, good morning, Mr. Martin, because I was in Montreal. So, Mr. Martin was my name. And, I would notice something, I would thank them for coming in, and they'd ask me to do things. So then I'd walk around, and at some point I had close to 50 operators at the plant. And, it'd take quite a while. It would almost take me to first break to do that first pass. And then I'd go to break with them. And then after break, I'd maybe go sit down to my desk because I absolutely had, some duties to do there. But this method of just walking around, and right now, apparently, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's called management by walking around. There's actually an acronym, and if you can see it on Wikipedia. So sort of my perception of manufacturing was completely different going into it, after working it working But one of the things that I was frustrated with was the fact that I moved completely away from the data. So I moved from data centric to people centric, and I didn't do anything with the data. But I was able to drive improvement in my lines just by being there and solving these problems. So yeah, I'm not going to go on a 10-minute monologue here, but that was kind of setting the stage for the reason why I founded Raven. My perception of manufacturing before getting to the shop floor and after getting to the shop floor are completely different. So here, after working there for a few years, I kind of got a sense for what it took to provide value to my operators. I think the way that I perceived it is, if I can, basically as a supervisor at the time, it's my job to solve problems for my operators. What my operators are doing is pretty clear: keep the machines running, and I need to walk around, find those problems, and fix it. In some ways, the success of any business is not related to whether or not you have problems. It's related to how well and how quickly you solve those problems. So anyways, so that was really my time in manufacturing, which was super exciting. And I, as a competitive athlete, I almost got some of that same feeling on a shop floor when things are rolling. It really feels cool to be part of a team and to be successful. So anyways, after leaving, I followed my wife to Ottawa when she was doing her PhD and I tried commuting to Montreal from Ottawa, which is a 2-hour drive, 3 hours with traffic. And I did that for about 3 weeks. And then I said, you know what, this is, so then I basically, I put up my shingle and started a consultancy, which combined my background in high tech and manufacturing, and started consulting for this little startup scene in Ottawa. So this was 2007. So I got connected to a guy named Paul Lem, who's the CEO of Spartan Bioscience, and you should check them in the news here. They have real-time DNA testing for COVID testing. So I consulted for, and I did some design work for Spartan Bioscience, and then there's a small company in town at the time with 10 people called Shopify, and we started hanging out at Shopify's office, and Shopify was doing some pretty cool things, and slowly this group, and we called ourselves, I think, Young Entrepreneur Club at the time, and now it's Fresh Founders, and slowly this club started doing some pretty cool stuff. So then Shopify started blowing up, and then Paul's company, Spartan Bioscience, started, doing really cool stuff. And then somebody sold his company. One of my other friends sold his companies to SurveyMonkey, and things started going more and more. And this little small group of us entrepreneurs in Ottawa began to sort of do some pretty amazing things. And I'm running my consultancy and serving them. I did some work for a Get Around, a company in Silicon Valley, and with another one of the people in the club. And then there's a point at which they kicked me out of the club. So they kind of presented to me that the lowest form of entrepreneurship is being a consultant. So here I am hanging out in this entrepreneurs club, not really, I guess I'm an entrepreneur as a consultant, and and they say, well, you're not sort of the caliber of entrepreneur that we're looking for in this club. And I'm like, really? So anyways, and I'm still consulting for them. And then at some point I started getting frustrated, going like, yeah, I think, being a consultant is not really what I want to do. I think I want to start something. And I happen to have this problem that I'm really passionate about solving, which is, why don't manufacturers use data in the way that I think they should use data? So first things first, I go to my buddy, Paul, and I say, hey, Paul, I'm thinking of starting this company in I think I called it IoT for manufacturing at the time. And I said, Paul, do you think I should do it? And he's like, no, don't do it. You're a great consultant. Stick to what you're good at. You wouldn't be good at being an entrepreneur. And it's like, So I most of the time I listened to Paul, but in this case here, I chose not to listen to him. And so then I started up what I called machine telemetry at the time. And really the idea was, how can you allow for manufacturers to use their data in a way that doesn't take out what's most special about being a leader in manufacturing? And what's most special is the time that you are working with your team to identify and solve problems. Any time that's not spent doing those things, I feel is time not well spent. And my frustration back then at how much leader time is spent filling spreadsheets, reporting out data is just mind-numbing. And there had to be a better way. And I would say even today, way too much time is consumed by technology rather than unlocked with technology. So I founded the company at the time, as an engineer, I'd always heard that you're supposed to name your company exactly what you do. So I called it machine telemetry because we're taking telemetry from the machines at the time. And then I met up with my co-founder, Braden, PhD from Institute for Aerospace Studies, University of Toronto, which is basically, I always say it's the rocket science program in Canada. It's the top. So I always say that, and Braden is the rocket scientist, and his eyes glaze over when he sees that. So yeah, and the idea here is that, how do we combine the best of technology with actual experience running operations? And that's kind of been the formula for what we've built to date. So we found it. We start to do some work for manufacturers, and I say, hey, Paul, because I'd always go back to Paul, my buddy from Spartan Bioscience, check it out. And he says, oh, it's pretty cool. You should raise some money. He says, oh yeah, let's do it. And but your company name sucks. I said, yeah. Machine telemetry is the worst name ever. You should name the company Raven. And I said, why, Paul? And he was telling me with regards to the company name, like nobody's ever going to want to say, hey, the guys from machine telemetry are here. So he said Raven because Odin, the Norse god, has these two ravens, Hugin and Munin, and they fly around the world getting information for him, which is kind of what you do. And I said, boom, let's do it. So, so we changed the company name, reached out to some of my buddies who are, now quite successful in Ottawa. And they're like, this is really cool. And that kind of started the, we raised some money, and we've raised a bunch of money since from effectively this network that we've had from the start in Ottawa. that's now basically given back and supported our community. The formula that we've had for building the business to date is really by combining the best that modern tech has to offer with a deep understanding of manufacturing. And we've built that to date. So, for example, on our executive team now, we have Rob Lander, who was president and CEO of Stackpole International, billion-dollar publicly traded auto parts manufacturer, who spent his career, transforming manufacturing operations. So for us, it's really important to have that, the core understanding of what it takes to transform manufacturing, because in some ways the people aspect of change management is the same. People are the same. Technology has advanced, but we haven't. And really, that's been the formula for what we've done so far. And now, we serve global manufacturers from Sanofi to Danaher to Hitachi. And effectively, it's really with the same vision that we've always had, which is how do you provide, a clear understanding of what's actually happening, which is a pretty big challenge, and I can get into that later. And then once with this information, how do you provide it in a way where they can actually take actions to improve? And the gold standard for application of modern technology, in my mind, is Waze or Google traffic. So you think about how this technology basically cuts to the chase. It doesn't dominate your attention. It doesn't drown you in dashboards and constantly needing to you to look at it or interact with it. On occasion, it provides guidance. If you listen to that guidance, you will perform at a much higher level. So that is the gold standard. We're not quite there in manufacturing yet, where there is a place for dashboards and other reports. But really, that is the value that technology can provide, which is to help to identify problems and make it easier to solve them more quickly.
Yeah, and just to clarify for listeners, when you said Waze, you're referring to the app, right? That the traffic app, that where the input comes from both, real data, but then also like traffic data, but also the input that people are physically providing by typing into the app, right?
Absolutely. And now the way that it works is it gets data from your car and from traffic. People contribute data, but one of the core things is that data needs to be accurate. Mm-hmm. If that data is not accurate, no matter what you do on top of that inaccurate data, you won't be able to provide good guidance. One of the biggest challenges today is that in the industry 4.0 space, or in manufacturing today, there's tons of companies out there providing analytics, maintenance software. Now, many of these systems rely on the data that's fed into them. And this data has been collected from machines for decades. But the most valuable data is to understand when the process is not running. When the process is not running, the way to get it is typically through manually entered methods. Either somebody writes it down, types it in Excel, or pulls a drop-down menu. So all of these systems sit on this rickety structure where humans are entering data into the system. And the fact that they're all sitting on top of this means that data quality is one of the biggest issues that has people haven't emphasized. So half of the problem with many of these systems is data quality, and the fact that these other systems with analytics and dashboards are sitting on top of this poor data quality. People get burned. People get burned by getting pointed in the wrong direction. And what happens when you get burned a few times? You get disengaged. So you have these systems that exist to present metrics that people don't trust on the shop floor. And then at the core, people are going back to doing what they've been doing for 30 years, which is managing their day-to-day based on instincts. So to solve the Industry 4.0 challenge, you need to make sure that it's sitting on a foundation of good data. And then once people have confidence that the data is trustworthy, how do you give them a tool to allow them to take actions to identify and solve those problems more quickly?
Yeah, so you really are bringing together kind of the best of both worlds there. Like, what are some ways that, just to try to make it tangible for listeners here, what are some ways that your tool Raven.ai harmonizes the best of the data being collected from machines and the human input?
Well, at the core, I think what makes it really clear is that our clients work with us because they get a return on their investment. So there is a cost. Our technology costs a certain amount, so they need to see that return. So and what delivers that return changes based on where they are in their evolution. So an example, we serve a Danaher plant in California, large organization. And as I mentioned before, one of the biggest challenges is to know what's happened. So this particular plant had an issue where machines that were producing goods were down for a long period of time for unknown reasons. And if you were to look at the machine data, it would highlight the fact that they are down because they're broken. So, at a high level, the machines are broken. What do you do to address broken machines? Well, maybe you get engineers to try to make the machines run more smoothly, right? But what we saw when we deployed our technology was that when a machine breaks and goes down, there's actually 3 different segments of time. So there's the first segment of time where you're waiting for maintenance to arrive. The second one, you're fixing the machine. And the third one, you're waiting for the operator to come back. So those 3 different segments of time require different things to resolve. So, when we finally sliced it up and showed them, it was shocking to see that they were losing 600 hours, machine hours per month because of waiting for maintenance. And this is not that they didn't have maintenance staff, or it was just, a slight misalignment of their schedule. So one of the amazing things is that the first time you see data presented accurately, the types of things that you need to do to drive gains early on are often mundane. And it's so in this case here, they reduced their waiting for maintenance downtime by 90%, resulting in significant OEE gains. And if you were to see what they're actually doing on the shop floor, it is not revolutionary. It just comes this is the kind of thing where if you were to define this problem and give operators, this is the problem, this is your team, we're spending too much time waiting for maintenance. They know how to solve this problem, right? All you need to do is and we don't solve problems. We just present them to people who know how to solve them on the shop floor. So one of the exciting things is that, often the kinds of things we see early on are, you're spending too much time waiting for maintenance. You're spending 3 times as much time as you should on setup. Your machine stops and starts way too often. So there's tons of early gains as soon as you, I guess in some ways, just flick on the lights for the first time.
No, that's a really good example. It's the data alone doesn't tell enough of the story, without the human input, right? And interpretation of what it actually means.
Absolutely. And I think at some point here, you'll notice that I never use the word OEE or all these other metrics here, because at some point the problem was they are spending too much time waiting for maintenance.
Yeah.
So let's eliminate that problem. And there's so much talk, the conversation about Industry 4.0 and IIoT and AI, cloud, and all this kind of stuff here. It's so far removed from, supervisors and maintenance leaders having a conversation about what kinds of things they can do together to reduce how much time they're spending waiting for maintenance. So in some ways, the most effective Industry 4.0 projects right now aren't called Industry 4.0 projects. They're called continuous improvement projects, or not even projects. It's just part of continuous improvement. So for that particular example, in none of our communication were we mentioning smart manufacturing, Industry 4.0, cloud. That wasn't there. Danaher has continuous improvement baked into their culture. They are looking for practical ways to drive gains. And we're happy to be a tool in their toolkit to support them to make these gains. And that's effectively what Industry 4.0 is. It's not a movement. It's not this big transformation from one way to another. It is a pretty neat tool in the toolkit. But that's not the narrative that's presented, on social media, not on LinkedIn and all that, or even in boardrooms from, large manufacturers.
In another one of your articles on LinkedIn, Martin, you referenced a Deloitte study that showed how labor productivity in manufacturing had been growing very consistently and rapidly from the late 1960s until 2007 or so. And then since then, despite turning on what you referred to as the real-time data fire hose, that productivity has stagnated. And it was surprising for me to see this. I'm curious if you could talk about why that has happened.
Yeah, it was pretty shocking to see. It was by Deloitte and MAPI, an organization, a manufacturing organization, doing a study of labor productivity, and it's it's almost like the moment the iPhone was released, productivity growth basically flatlined. But really the thing that changed was this appetite for real-time data. So up until that point, we've always had data. In manufacturing in particular, data is just a fundamental part of our lives. But the way we consumed it was in a manageable amount. We would see performance, once a shift. As mentioned before, we would spend our time walking around. So you'd see your daily shift report. You'd internalize the problem that you're trying to solve, and you go and try and solve it. So what, as technology advanced with the cloud and IoT and access to all this data, the way that we implemented solutions very much sort of copied our KPI report-centric view of how to drive improvement. So rather than changing how we perceive how we should use data, we simply took a report that we used to see once a shift and just made it live. Now, when you flip to real time, if you make reports real time, there's a couple issues. One, often with the once a day reports, you have people getting in there to actually make adjustments so that the numbers are trustworthy. And the second one is our reports and KPIs typically aren't an effective way to guide action. So, you go back to my Waze example. Waze is not a series of dashboards and KPIs. It's simple instructions that tell you how to avoid traffic. And I think that's a big difference here. So, whereas we have this technology that's able to collect and present tons and tons of data in real time, our capability to consume data is still quite low. So, how do you, and I think we've struggled with this change that has, impacted the two things that I mentioned earlier, which is data quality and engagement. Presenting a dashboard in real time that has questionable data that's not directive is not helping people on the shop floor take actions to drive improvement. So, but at the same time, there's been this movement over the last 10 years to invest in technology. And there's been this, companies are investing massive amounts in pilots and different initiatives, often very, very large initiatives that are disruptive organizationally. So, and in many cases with these implementations, the most complex part isn't the technological part. It is change management. So by taking these systems, which just are fundamentally flawed and are not helping, you're actually disrupting organizations and creating disengagement on the shop floor, which does not help, nurture and improve a continuous improvement culture. So, if I were to think of the formula for manufacturers, big or small, if to deploy this technology properly, first, you need to work on your continuous improvement culture, and this needs to happen before even thinking about investing in technology. Continuous improvement, once it's baked into our culture, then view technology as a tool in the toolkit, and every manufacturer should be looking for the right tool for the job, and should be very wary of tools that if the team is rejecting your tool, there's probably a good reason for it. So the second thing is that often, because of the big, the scale of how Industry 4.0 is presented online, everybody thinks they need to go big, where the reality is that the best way to deploy this kind of technology is to deploy quick and small and manageable and accelerate and double down on success. And it's amazing to see on LinkedIn when anybody posts something that shows a whiteboard. So somebody is really proud of their whiteboard and they say, hey, I made a KPI whiteboard. Check it out, LinkedIn. And then people jump all over it. So there's the old school folks that say, this is the way to go. It's so connected to the operator, it creates engagement. It's like, it's perfect. And then there's the tech folk that go like, no, what are you guys doing? You're stuck in the 70s or stuck in the 80s. That's not the way to do it. When the reality is they're both right. So one of the things that whiteboards do that technology often doesn't do is that it takes the operator and the production team along for the ride. So you start, it's white. There's nothing there. You come up with a concept. If the operators or anybody makes a suggestion, you can just take your whiteboard tape and draw something new. And there's this neat way to create engagement and involvement with the people who are actually using the technology. The operators, if they don't see value in it, it's, if operators don't see value in these systems, you're off to a bad start. So like the best way that the way that operators benefit from technology, if the technology applies pressure to their leaders to fix their problems. So the great thing with whiteboards is it takes them along for the ride. Technology is likely a better way to implement the end state, but it misses that journey to get to that end state. So what we've seen with our clients is that you can get the best of both worlds by starting with an extremely simple and basic implementation and take the operators along for the ride as they're beginning to, request complexity. So the first phase is what is happening, and in some ways you can even create, like if you're thinking of how to categorize time, if you categorize time in 9 different ways, let's just categorize time in 9 different ways and let the operators push for added complexity. So once you know what's happening, then the next thing is, what has happened, what's happening. That's kind of like the basics. And then the next phase is, why is it happening? And if you take operators along this journey, then your maintenance team and your supervisors and plant managers are along for the journey. And that's how you actually integrate technology into your continuous improvement culture. By coming in with this end state, which may look the same, and saying, implement this now, you've missed that part that actually creates that connection and glue between technology and continuous improvement culture. And without that connection, it just doesn't fit.
It's all really, really good stuff there. Martin, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to add to this conversation before we put a wrap on it?
No, I think we covered it all here. And it's an exciting time in manufacturing. I think over the last year, with all the the turmoil and change brought on by COVID, manufacturers are talking about digital transformation in Industry 4.0 more than ever. I think there's a lot of talk, a lot of concern. There isn't a lot of practical guidance for manufacturers showing them how to actually take action here. So I think if I were to sort of sum it up to one thing here, to start off with Industry 4.0 for any size manufacturer, the best approach is to start quickly, start small, start simply. And with that foundation, and this is with your operators, and with that foundation, double down on success and accelerate. If you start too big and you start from the top down, it's just going to be on the scrap heap of failed Industry 4.0 projects and kind of continue the pilot purgatory that's been going around for a while now. So it's I would also say that there's a huge appetite for this technology. It hasn't necessarily, the solution hasn't been articulated in a way that's resonating with plant managers, but in the same way where there's an Uber moment where people would never jump into a car with a stranger, to saying like, actually, it's okay, I'm going to jump in a car with a stranger because they just got that value prop just right. There's going to be that Uber moment in manufacturing where manufacturers recognize that this is the way that they need to run their operations to actually keep up. This is the way to do it, twice as efficient and spend half the amount of money. So there's that Uber moment coming when people are going to realize, and because of how simply this technology can be deployed nowadays, it's going to go quickly. So it's exciting to kind of see that coming. I'm not sure exactly what's going to trigger that moment, but it's definitely conversations like this where we're talking about practical applications of Industry 4.0 are going to help us get closer to that. And it's definitely exciting to be in this space at this time.
Martin, great conversation today. This was really valuable. I think we're going to have this will be a very popular episode. So I really appreciate you doing this. Can you give our audience a sense for how to get in touch with you and where they can learn more about Raven?
Yeah, so the main way to get in touch with me is on LinkedIn, and now on Clubhouse. You got to check us out on Clubhouse, Industry 4.0 on Clubhouse. It's going to be pretty awesome.
Beautiful. And then raven.ai is the URL for
that's right,
for your software. So, all right. Well, fantastic. Martin, thanks again for taking the time to join me today. Really appreciate it. And then for the rest of you, I hope to catch you on the next episode of Manufacturing Executive.